My name used to be something smaller, before shame and relief reshaped it into a private geography. For the story, call me Evan. It was 2007, and I lived out on the spine of the high desert, a place where towns are punctuation marks and everything you need, gas, a taco joint, a friend, can be 20 minutes of road away. The highway through our valley, Route 47, was under construction then, a slow, grinding project that made the familiar routes into detours and the night feel longer. I was a senior in high school, stubborn and lazy in equal measure, with a steady girlfriend who lived over on Pinecrest Ridge. Getting to her meant crossing highways and walking country miles. My mom worked nights and slept the day away, so I learned early that you can't always rely on kindness at home. Hitchhiking was partly habit, partly necessity. I had learned the secret goat paths that shaved an hour off the walk. But sometimes I wanted the simpler, warmer human presence of stop-and-go travel someone's radio, a cup holder, a face that didn't belong to the landscape. That evening I was walking the long shoulder, as the sun buckled under the horizon and the desert leaned into cold. The sky browned and then blacked out like a curtain. A maroon van eased up beside me, and the passenger window lowered with an apologetic creak. "Need a lift?" the driver asked. He said his name was Charlie, though he pronounced it like a question. He had a big van and a thin smile and a twitch that lived in the corner of his jaw. His cheeks were drawn. He had that stretched, wired look of someone surviving on energy instead of sleep. When I climbed in, I told myself the old rules ride with my back to the door. Keep a hand free. Don't let yourself get cornered like a litany. He didn't smell like anything I could name. A chemical tang under sweat. He moved like a man who had rehearsed normal. Keys, seatbelt, small talk. He started talking about a guy named Mateo, as if Mateo were the son. "You ever meet Mateo?" he asked in a cadence that suggested the answer should be yes. He described Mateo's house, Mateo's truck, Mateo's bad knee. It was small, harmless filler until the words turned strange. "He's got a place out past the orchard. You ever been? He's got money. He'll set you up." He asked me questions I couldn't answer. Did I know him? Did I like him? And when I said no, he didn't seem to hear the refusal. There was a repeatability to his sentences, like a scratched record trying to find its groove. We didn't take the highway. "Too many delays with the construction," Charlie told me, eyes twitching toward my face. "I know a quicker cut." He steered off Route 47 and into the waste of desert tracks I'd learned to negotiate on foot. My chest did that clumsy thing of folding inward. The known paths I'd walked a dozen times in daylight now looked stranger from the passenger window. We passed houses dropped like afterthoughts into scrub, mailboxes with names I'd seen on school lists. There was that sick recognition. This is where you walk sometimes. This is where you could be alone if the person driving you decided to stop caring. When the van nosed down a long dirt lane, I knew we were in trouble. The gate creaked open like a throat. Dogs started up, a chorus of throats that swung from curiosity to outright frenzy with a velocity that made my knees go cold. Charlie's breathing changed. His fingers found the gear shift like someone clinging to a rail. I found a screwdriver in the door pocket and tucked it in my palm. It felt ridiculous and comforting both. A tiny weighted talisman. The property we pulled into was too neat to be abandoned and too remote to be normal. A 2-story tile house, white against the blue sky, desert roses trimmed like a picture. Someone had cared for it recently. A man came to the porch, older, weathered, shaved head, a white circle of beard that made him look like a stern saint. He watched me with a patient, evaluating stare. Charlie hiccuped words about Mateo, about getting you right, and the older man, Mateo, or maybe his name had shifted in the storytelling, gestured, as if the script was complete. Go meet him. Stay a while. My legs moved toward the gate before my brain did. As my foot hit the crushed stone beyond the threshold, relief hit in a shallow, awful wash. I started running the moment the gate cleared my back. Running felt like a bright, simple answer. Forward. Faster. Away. I didn't look back until I was halfway down the lane, and the house had become a rectangle of dim light. In the dark, the van's engine stuttered, then started, iron and diesel withdrawing from me, and when I finally dug out my prepaid phone and called the police, my voice existed somewhere thin and distant, a small thing inside a big, unlistening world. Later, in my bed, the adrenaline flaked into a raw, trembling quiet. I told the dispatcher everything, and the report became a number stored in a system that made polite noises and then did nothing I could see. I didn't tell my mom. I didn't tell my girlfriend. Pride lives in small places. An admission would have unpacked 100 lectures I wasn't ready to carry. I still took that bus to Pinecrest. But I learned to plan. There were schedules printed in my head now. The bus times, the grocery closing hours, the faces that always sat in the last row. I never stuck out my thumb again. Even now, years later, when the light falls just so on desert brush or a van eases up alongside the shoulder, my heart remembers the tight, insistent drum of that night. The dogs howled. The gate creaked. A man on a porch watched me like a judge, and a driver called a name so many times it became an offering. The screwdriver is long gone, but my fingers still find the phantom weight when they grip a door handle. After that night, the map of my life rearranged itself in the smallest ways. Routes I'd taken without thought became lines I measured before I walked. Times, lights, faces on the bus. The desert didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a place with pockets. Small, patient holes that could hold someone waiting. School carried on with its same noisy indifference. Classes, lunchroom jokes, pep rally banter. I kept the normal things because normal is an armor you can put on like a jacket. But the jacket never fit quite right after the van. Sleep was thin for a long time. I'd lie in bed and replay the sound of the dogs, an animal chorus that had climbed from curiosity to threat so fast it still startled me at odd hours. In my head, the howls looped like a siren. They weren't just an alarm, they were punctuation. You are noticed. I forced myself not to turn the lights on immediately when I woke. Darkness had a new vocabulary to me. It spoke in gate creaks, in diesel whispers, in the soft scrape of a boot on gravel. Once, months later, I woke to the sound of a truck idling 3 houses down, and I lay there, feeling the old pulse climb in my throat until I forced it down. I told myself the police would do something. I told myself the system was a grid that would catch a thing like a van on a rural stretch. I called back to the dispatcher twice more, asking if anyone had checked the property we'd fled from, asking if they'd run the license plate description. The first operator was polite and said someone had been dispatched to do a property check sometime that evening. The second promised, "We'll follow up." Promises are paper boats on a river of other people's priorities. No one called me. The paperwork I imagined filled out showed up only as a void. I didn't tell my mom. I told my girlfriend as little as I could, just the bare facts, enough to make her pester me for a while and then go back to playing the weekend. You don't always tell the people who love you the parts that make them worry. You hide the terror under a shirt because admitting fear is an amplifier. So I learned to rehearse. The bus schedule, the names of people who would sit at certain seats, the deliberate avoidance of the shoulder where a van could stop. I memorized the last 3 stops of every route I took so that if something felt wrong, I could get off early and be in public. I started carrying a little thing in my pocket, a screwdriver once, then a folding pocket knife, later tiny objects that feel like insurance, even when you know they're often only symbolic. After a week or two, the group didn't talk about it much anymore. People have lives that tide over small horrors. They move on, or they laugh and repackage the terror into a party story. But Jonah still touched his pocket where he kept the roadside cross trinket. Tommy avoided any mention of old cars. The men who'd been with me that night started to make jokes that never landed. The laughter was a net with holes. I sometimes caught myself scanning brake lights when I walked home in the dark, and one night my pulse slammed when a maroon van eased past my bus stop. I froze on the curb until the taillights slid away. I didn't want to make it a thing, but the world kept offering me the same shadow. Weeks later, I had a near miss that made me see that the van had not been a one-off. I was coming back from a late shift at a restaurant, the sky a slab of hard black. I stood under a sodium streetlight, reading the most boring text message and trying to make my legs stop shaking. A van rolled up slow on the opposite side of the road and idled. The silhouette matched the maroon paint, the dent on the rear quarter that looked like it had been kissed by a door, the slow, lazy chrome of an older model. The driver didn't get out. For a long, awful minute I considered running across the road and yelling and waking the neighbors. But the safe acts are awkward in the face of immediate possibility. I walked on, phone pretending to be important, heart doing a drumbeat that felt too loud to be mine. It pulled away after a block and stopped at the light, as if choosing whether to stay. Then it left. I told myself again these were coincidences. People keep cars like that. Old vans are everywhere. Maybe the man who'd stopped me had been off his meds or tripping, but maybe he'd also been practicing routes and faces and where someone like me might walk. The thought stuck. Someone patient enough can turn your routine into a plan. It was a small calculus that made me angry and small at once. The thing that haunted me most wasn't the image of the tall, twitchy driver or the older man on the porch. It was the way the house had looked at us, well-kept, polite, like a neighbor who'd never let their lawn grow wild, and how it hid that small kingdom of threat. Good houses are the worst places for mischief because they teach civility and hide what happens inside. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in a dark window, and I'd think I saw that older man's gaze in the glass, curious, patient, not unkind, just a look that had watched enough to know what the world supplied. I stopped hitchhiking. That small decision rewired other parts of my life. I started walking earlier, took bus schedules I could trust, and saved a few dollars to call cabs if I needed to. Little acts of prudence stack up into a kind of shield, but the memory lives as a thin wire under my skin. How fast my mouth had gone dry, how the screwdriver had felt like a tiny island of control in my palm. It taught me one blunt lesson. Strangers aren't always strangers by accident. Sometimes they choose the places you make yourself visible. They study you in the underlight and wait. The desert didn't stop being beautiful. Sunsets still opened the world into color you could bottle. But there's a certain part of me that now watches for the flash of a van in the rear view, the sudden chorus of canines, the slow gate creak that marks the last second before a choice. When I tell the story now, my voice goes small in the middle because the memory tightens there. Even so, I tell it because memory wants company. I tell it because not hitchhiking again is a small triumph, and because knowing the sound of your own heartbeat, loud, scared, alive, is better than not knowing if you'll wake at all. The long winter after that year finally taught me how fear becomes a ledger you carry around in your head. I filed small rules in the corners of my life. Never accept a ride from anyone without a proper reason. Memorize bus schedules. Keep my phone charged and prepaid. And those rules slowly knitted themselves into habit. But habit is not the same as healing. The memory of that maroon van lived in the small places where my body kept score. A sudden silence at night, a gate's creak that sounded like teeth, the way my hands tightened on a door handle without thinking. Months after the first ride, when life on the ridge had settled into its usual rhythm, I got a call that made all the old dampness come back. A kid from school had been seen on the shoulder near the orchard. Someone had reported a van stopping to offer him a ride. My stomach dropped into a familiar hollow. It felt like someone had left a fresh print next to the old ones. I didn't want to be dramatic, but I also wasn't going to ignore the chance to do something. This time, I did not sit and wait for the police to catch what I'd already told them about. The memory of that empty, invisible paperwork sitting in the system made me change. I told myself I would be useful. I packed a flashlight, the old screwdriver that had felt so heavy in my palm the night Charlie first stopped, and my prepaid burner. I asked Jonah and Tommy to come with me. They agreed without jokes. The three of us left town in a single sputtering car, headlights swallowing the desert. We parked far from the orchard on a narrow side road, the engine ticking as it cooled, and walked the shoulder toward where the lighted highway folded into dirt. It took a while. We moved slow, listening for engines in the dark and watching the black line of the desert for any blink of a taillight. I felt ridiculous being proud of the little litany I'd learned. Check behind you. Know the nearest open store. Make a list of known buses. But the litany steadied me like a prayer. Halfway down the lane, flashlights scoured the brush. The night smelled of dust and metal, and those slow, wet old leaves that stick to the shoulder. Then, like a memory called back, the van eased into a hollow of the road, maroon dent on the quarter, paint dull as old skin. My breath went shallow. Jonah and I exchanged a look that had no room for bravado. Tommy stepped forward and, in a voice that tried to outspeak fear, called out, "Hey, you can't be here." The engine idled and then went quiet. The driver's window cracked down with that same apologetic creak. A face leaned out, Charlie or someone who'd been him, thinner than I remembered, his jaw more hollow, eyes darting like a man who was always listening for a siren. There was a twitching energy in his hands, the same nervous motor that had been so obvious the first time I'd climbed into his van. I felt my pulse in my neck like a small drum. I didn't step closer. Instead, I took the one thing the police hadn't given me the first night: presence. I held the flashlight high, aimed it at the van's interior, so any camera nearby would record light across the dashboard. "We called this in," Jonah said. "You better pull away." Charlie's mouth moved. I couldn't make out words, but he was trying explanation and negotiation at once, like a man listing the reasons his life should be believed. From my pocket I took a breath, dialed the non-emergency number, and spoke into the phone with careful clarity. I gave location, license detail I could make out from one of the van's bumper stickers, and the make and model. My hands did not shake the way they had the first time I called the police. This time, I was an actor with a script: observation, report, follow-up. I wasn't letting paperwork evaporate into polite noise. Charlie started the van and tried to peel away slowly. "Get his plate," I hissed at Tommy. He took out his phone and, with a restless thumb, froze an angle as the van accelerated. We followed at a cautious distance, not chasing in anger, but keeping eyes on where it went. On the phone, the dispatcher confirmed units were headed our way. She asked us to remain safe, to keep our distance. The van turned toward a dusty side road and then into the sheen of highway light. The officers arrived before it could disappear into the black-blue strobes cutting up the night like a promise. They stopped the van at the shoulder. 2 officers approached slowly, hands visible, flashlights cutting rectangles into the cab. When they ordered the driver out, Charlie's movement was jerky, a flinch that looked like surrender with the wrong timing. He kept saying something about just helping kids, a mantra that sounded crackled and thin. The officer asked for ID and radioed for a check. In the back, someone opened the sliding door and a dog stuck its head out, a small brown face yawning in confusion. The officers found pills and paraphernalia, small bags in corners, and a set of gas-stained blankets in the van that could have easily been used for long, slow stays in desert hollows. There were also photos, Polaroids and crumpled prints, of boys at the shoulder, faces half smiling in the way of uneasy pictures. It wasn't a neat chain of criminal acts leading to a single motive. It was uglier, piecemeal, opportunistic, a predator with a habit. They read him his rights and took him in. The officers asked us for statements, and that part felt smaller and more ordinary than the rest of the night. Names, times, plate numbers. Paperwork at last. Walking back to the car, the desert felt like something you could breathe without a choking rod in your throat. The dog they unlatched shook itself, then trotted up to Jonah and nosed his hand like it had always known him. The officers promised follow-ups and told us to stay near town for a little while longer, just in case. I watched Charlie's shoulders as he was led away and felt a complicated unspooling inside me. Relief, sorrow, anger, a tired gratitude that we'd not been victims that night, and that, Maybe this time we'd helped keep someone else from being one. The legal outcomes came slowly: charges, hearings, a small newspaper story that condensed a night into a few awkward paragraphs. His name appeared in dispatch logs and court dockets. The van was towed. The dog, it turned out, was surrendered to a local rescue and later adopted. The city did its work in the way cities do: record keeping and notices, and a slow attempt at closure. For me, closure never arrived as a single satisfying moment. Instead, it was a series of small loosening. I slept somewhat better. I caught buses without scanning the shoulders. I stopped imagining every van in my peripheral vision as a threat. That night on the highway didn't fix everything. It didn't take away the way my hands still remember the weight of a screwdriver, or how a gate creak will still cut my breath for a second. What it did was fold an ugly possibility into a different shape, one where attention mattered, where being the kind of person who calls, who waits, who shows up with a flashlight and a witness, could interrupt the pattern of someone waiting in the dark. The final picture that sits on my chest is small: a van under the police light, the dog curled on the seat like a damp rag of trust, and a man walking in cuffs whose eyes were not everything and not nothing. It's not cinematic. It's messy and human and true. The desert is still wide and pretty, but now when I hear a van ease up alongside the road, I don't automatically freeze. I reach for my phone and see if someone else is awake to answer the call.